couple of days ago, some roster moves took place, which people are referring to as the CIS shuffle. And it was the move that HellRaisers removed Marklov and Simple, and they brought in Flamey and Adren to their lineup, and that's their lineup completed. And then Marklov and Simple were clanless for like a day or so, 2 days, and then they went and joined the team that Flamey and Adren had come from, which was DAT team, D-A-T team. Now, in terms of my overall thoughts on HellRaisers, that was actually the topic of the first video I did in this Thorin's Thoughts series, so you can go way back and look at that in terms of historically what I think of HellRaisers. But in terms of the recent HellRaisers, now HellRaisers had what looked to be kind of a change to their overall form at DreamHack Winter when we saw that they managed to beat Fnatic on Mirage, which is big upset. Fnatic are amazing on Mirage, but they managed to beat them 16-14 and win the group stage and absolutely smash Cloud9 on Inferno. And so they won the group stage, they went to the round of 8, and if you remember, the hype between the round of 8 and the group stage, the quarterfinals that is, was all about this coach that they brought in. They brought in Blade, this former Kirchnet leader. He's in that team, in fact, as a player. And he's famous as one of the best Ukrainian in-game leaders. He's not at the level of like Zeus, who's like a great guy who's won majors, but he's up there. He was a good player in 1.6 in terms of in-game leadership and crafting a team and having a concept to the tactics and using different players. And it seemed to be working. He was allowed to stand behind them. Markov even said some comment like, we are just dolls in his hands and he's kind of like the puppet master, just moving us around where he wants. Okay, that all sounded great in theory, except when they went to the round of 8, the quarterfinals, they played NIP. And because of their form, I actually thought, looking at the form of NIP in the group stage, which was fairly poor, and looking at the form of HellRaisers, which was really good, I thought, wow, HellRaisers is actually going to win this series here. NIP's maybe inexperienced, maybe they need more time to gel with Makalele. And what happened was two key factors. One, HellRaisers didn't play even close to their form from the day before. Their level was like just much, much lower. They didn't have any of that tactical prowess that we'd seen and supposedly this coach was bringing. And so that whole storyline got instantly deflated. And in fact, HellRaisers ended up removing the coach after the event. Like they just decided the experiment failed and they just tossed it away. So for all that hype, all that storyline, people even discussing like, oh, will it be a big advantage to have coaches? None of it ended up mattering in the end. Now, what's interesting is the other factor was, which made it hard to judge the level of HellRaisers, was Forrest had like probably one of the best series in individual games, especially the Inferno game, he's probably ever had in his entire CSGO career. Like a really extremely high level game where it's not just that he's killing you and getting kills and getting lots of frags rather than having lots of impact that way, but also his aim in the game was sort of that instant precise burst to the head. Now, when someone does that to you repeatedly, it can be borderline impossible to stop when it's someone at the level of Forrest. So that in itself made HellRaisers look even worse, but I do think they played a part in that loss. And so, okay, the problem with the way that story ended, the big major, was it ended and we kind of felt like, oh, yeah, the group stage was great, something happened there, but this just looked like the old HellRaisers. You always beat some team that in theory you're lower than in the rankings in the round of 8, in the group stage rather, because you're a skilled team, but then you always fail in the round of 8 against the big opponent, against the big match, especially one where you maybe have a chance to win now. That's the one where you always blow it and you always just get kicked the shit out of you, and they did it again. So okay, I understand why you'd look at roster moves as a way to fix this problem, because they clearly have some sorts of problems here. The two players they removed. Now, removing Marklov, I actually just made a video describing his 1.6 career. I sort of get it in a way, because within their team, I've always felt that Marklov, out of all of them, was the odd man out. Like, he never could fully embrace being like the superstar, like he'd been in 1.6, and even in Na'Vi before he joined, the other players, they all had sort of their role. Like I understood what Dozier's role was. I knew what Angel was going to do. Even Kucha, the way they sort of used him, I thought sometimes he didn't play very well, but I understood his role. It made sense. To me, the players within their lineup that had always not made sense was Adren and Marklov. So they didn't have Adren at this time. They had Marklov. And if you want to remove someone, yeah, he probably is one of the ones you'd have to pick. Especially as I've always thought he should have left and gone back to Na'Vi anyway and tried that experiment again, because I think that would be a better fit for him. So okay, it makes sense to pick him out. He's the odd man out. Now, Simple, this is a lot more tricky because he was clearly by far the best player in the team during the time he was there. So really a very talented player, clearly. just plays with no fear, very confident, uses all the weapons, very aggressive. Like, yeah, I love all that stuff. The big problem for him was, first of all, people forget. People act as though he was in HellRaisers for all of 2014. He was one of the best players of the year. No, he wasn't. He was only in the team for 4 LAN tournaments. And of those 4 LAN tournaments, only 2 were international tournaments, ESWC and DreamHack Winter. And DreamHack Winter didn't go very well. And ESWC was fairly like, all right. And so his level was really good in most of these tournaments, but he didn't get a lot of play for this team. It was mainly online play and maybe like domestic play. Okay, so he's a good player. On terms of his skills, you wouldn't remove him. The problem comes, he had 2 factors that are like black marks against his name. First and foremost, he was banned, apparently like back in 1.6 or something. I forget the full details of it, but he's banned by ESL. And so the way ESL bans work is you can't compete in any of their tournaments if you're banned. And so as a result, in theory, apparently he can't play in any majors that are going to be taking place in ESL tournaments. And so what that means is, if EMS 1 Katowice turns out to be the next major, the next 250k major, and it's in March of next year, then he can't play. So now if you're HellRaisers, you can't play in the major. Now listen, that on paper makes sense, and that's one of the reasons he himself gave as to why he'd been removed. That makes sense. Here's the problem with that. Why recruit him in the first place? Were you really not aware of that? You surely must have been. I mean, this information has been out there. If you were aware of that, then you were just gambling that for these months it'd be worth it and win this major here, the DreamHack Hunter one. Okay, that's not entirely implausible. Maybe it would go awesome. You'd win that major and you'd bring in a stand-in for the next one. Okay, that's actually not totally unreasonable. But it just doesn't add up to me that the timing of when you choose to do this would be now. When you could have either gambled on someone like they got in now, Flamey, beforehand, and said, oh, well, we'll leave this other guy and see when he becomes unbanned and pick him up. You know, that's the part that doesn't make sense, because the problem is the second factor is what seems more like the factor that they've really chosen here, which is that just out of being a stupid young guy who hasn't thought things through and is just doesn't understand the cultural sensitivity and context of things you can say in English language into the West on stream, there was an incident where Simple said what would be perceived to be an offensive statement to Germans. He basically told Germans to like fuck off and made a comment that like the Nazis used to say. So yeah, obviously you wouldn't advise that, would they? And in an ideal world, we could all just go, what an idiot, and maybe we could get over it, or there'd be some sort of course that he'd undertake that would teach him what cultural sensitivity and like, if you say these things, this is what it means, and all the rest of that bullshit. But anyway, ignoring all that, it clearly put a black mark on his name, and people would probably associate it with HellRaisers. Unfortunately, that's just the world that we live in, I'm afraid. So people would probably bring it up again and again. I imagine that probably did have something to do, added in with the ESL 1 ban, and then needing to make roster moves anyway. Those 3 factors all correlated is probably the reason he's not in this team now. Now the problem with that is that, like I say, as a player, he's a dynamite player, so you are letting a talent go that you're not replacing. Now the players they brought in, Flamey and Adren. Flamey it does seem like a talent, but he's much less of a sure thing than Simple was when Simple came in. Like, Simple actually does have some of those qualities, just in terms of skill, not necessarily game sense and mentality, just in terms of skill, he does have some of the elements of a prodigy. Like, he just seems very, very good in terms of raw skill. Flamey's not quite like that. Flamey is quite skilled, and he'll have games where he looks pretty good, but he's the sort of player where when he's taking the step up from, like, the tier 3 team to the tier 2 team now I'm starting to wonder, like, okay, will he actually be able to do it within this team of other veterans and other good players like Dosia? Will he be as good now? And will he be as good when every game's on LAN and you're playing against big opponents and you're making it further than you did before, when you could just go out in the round in the group stage, but you could have one good performance yourself? That's when I'm starting to wonder. So there's question marks over him. But of the players left, I understand why they'd pick him to pick up. Now, the one that makes less sense is Adren. The only reason I can see that they would pick up Adren is, first of all, Adren... Okay, maybe I should give some context to Adren. I could probably do a video about him one day, but a quick version is, in 1.6, he's by far the most talented player to ever come out of Kazakhstan, which might sound like a joke, like, oh, we are oh, really? Kazakhstan? Oh my god, he must be amazing. No. Okay, Kazakhstan didn't have great teams. They had one team that could maybe be around like 8th or 9th best in the world and used to get upsets, K23. But he was a very skilled player. He was really skilled. I remember one tournament, Asus... I think it was Asus Summer 2010, when Na'Vi was on their roll of winning everything, and he pretty much single-handedly body-bagged Na'Vi, including on Train, their best home map, in the semi-final and won that event. And as a result, it allowed H2K with Exist and those guys to win the tournament afterwards. So this guy was really sick. Now in CSGO, he wasn't like that at all. In CSGO, he was more of just an all-round player. He'd have some okay rounds, but he wasn't actually that skilled. Amongst top players, he was at the bottom end. In terms of like the top 5 to 10 teams in the world, he wouldn't have been one of the best players. He was just a middling to bad player, if I'm being honest. But he seemed to understand kind of some of the supportive components. He was playing around the team. He was doing the dirty work. He would win the odd clutch here and there. And I remember he was part of the original Virtus Pro core, which going forwards became Astana Dragons later when they added Edward and Marklov. But now that Marklov's gone, this is basically back to the Virtus Pro core, because they've got Dosia, they've got Angel, they've got Kucha, and they've got Adren. Well, those are 4 of the players that were in that Virtus Pro team, the one that famously beat NIP at Star Ladder, and then later on they brought Guardian in, actually in place of Adren, funnily enough. But that's the thing, Adren's been in and out of the team because whenever they come to cut someone, he is the obvious choice. So they always cut him and they always bring in an aimer instead. So okay, they've gone back to that. Now, if they've got a better approach, like it's going to be more of a tactical approach, maybe that can work. My problem here is, I don't think he's that good a player, really. So if I was going to gamble on talent and I still wanted aimers, I probably would have just got World Edit as well from that team and just brought him in. Or I would have just brought Blade himself in and had him actually play in the team and be the in-game leader. Because my big issue here is, you've got some skill, but unless you're going to become a much better tactical team and understand your strengths better, which they haven't really shown an ability to, aside from that group stage at DreamHack Winter, you have to feel like with this team, if you don't have good tactics, here's a simple rule for you. If you don't have good tactics and you don't have some kind of natural chemistry, then you must have incredibly high skill levels. That's what they always went for in the past. Now they're stuck in an area now where I don't know if they'll have good tactics, and I also feel like their skill level's gone down. So now, basically, yeah, Dosia at times can be very good still. Flamey seems like he could potentially develop into someone good, but isn't quite there yet. Kucha is kind of hit and miss. Who else have we got now? Adren and Angel. Angel's okay. He can do some entry fragging. Yeah, he's not bad at that. He's the in-game leader, but not such a great in-game leader. He's just okay, it seems. And Adren, I've already talked about, it's not that skilled. So my problem here is, maybe the style might work better. They might be a better team in that sense, but I still see a lot of question marks all over this lineup. And I think they still need to choose a direction to go in, because I'm not sure what's going to change just with Angel, but with these players. Now, maybe that's part of the reason why. Maybe they know these players can do X and Y. I doubt it, by the way. That's not usually the way CS transfers work. They haven't really thought it through that often. Now then, going the other way, if you're the DAT team. Now, DAT team's that lineup obviously gets better because, first of all, they get a legend in Marklov, and then secondly, they get Simple, who's one of the best players, if not the best player from the CIS region right now. Oh, actually, that's ridiculous. You can't really say he's the best player. He's only played 4 lands with HellRaisers. The best player has to be Guardian or Edward, so... yeah, I'll take that back. One of the best players, one of the top 2 or 3 players in your region. So that alone is going to give them a lot more firepower. Crucially also, this team is good. Like actually, on paper at least. As a team, I don't know they'll be that good. I doubt they'll break the top 10, at least in the coming months. But they have the potential to, because they've got Blade, who I think, like I said, good in-game leader. Bondik is a guy people won't know, but he was in those latter day sort of DTS type, Kirchnet type teams at the end of, I think it was Kirchnet he was in. I don't know, maybe both of them towards the end, so sort of like 2011 sort of era, 2010 going into 2011, that time of year. He was a decent player. He wasn't great, but he was decent. World Edit, I mean, like I said, I think World Edit's a good player. I think he's sort of in a similar boat as Flamey. He's not quite as good as Flamey, but he's shown streaks online. For me, it was World Edit and Flamey were the 2 in that team who really had the talent, and I expected to potentially get picked up by a Na'Vi or a HellRaisers. Then you've got Marklov. Now, here's the big area where they could get a huge boon, is if they put Marklov in a star role, and if he really embraces it, and he really dedicates himself, and maybe getting kicked now motivates him, kick-starts him to go, I've got to get serious about this, I can't just dick around anymore. If that Marklov comes along, now they can be a good team. They could potentially be better than HellRaisers, as crazy as that sounds. Now, admittedly, they won't be able to go to as many lands. They don't have the same backing. Now, with Simple, obviously, he can be incredible. The big problem with Simple is, again, doesn't that mean this team now can't play in any of the majors without a stand-in? Well, last year, at the point of time period we're in now, the next 2 majors were ESL events. So is he just banned from both of those? That's kind of a problem in itself. So yeah, both teams have problems with them still. Also, in terms of other players you're getting, I said maybe get World Edit instead of Adren. Here's a few other names, and people might think I'm being crazy when I say this, but there have always been rumours surrounding Na'vi. Even though I think they're good, they're quite a consistent team and they're always good for a potential upset on a map. There have always been rumours surrounding them that maybe they'll break up or they'll have roster moves or people aren't happy within the team and they get frustrated. So if they were going to change players or players would leave, like even good players might consider leaving Na'vi, then the two players that come to mind immediately, first and foremost Guardian, because like I said, he's played with this core of people in Virtus Pro, and they were a good team in Virtus Pro. They were another team that beat NIP on LAN at EMS one summer in the semi-finals. They also, later on, let me think who else. So you've got Guardian. Obviously, by the way, Guardian's one of the best players in the world. Really good AWP, and if you want a really strong AWP, put him in. He can be a better AWPer than Simple, so put him in the team. You haven't lost much there. I think you'd actually have a better player. You could base more of the game around him. You could base it tactically around him as well. And then the other one is, I'm actually surprised. Well, I'm not surprised, because maybe the Na'Vi players wouldn't leave, but if you want another player to have on this list, it would actually be Seized. The reason I say Seized is because Seized actually played with these guys, like Dossier, in the latter days of 1.6. He played with them a little bit, and so he was around their lineups. So I'm interested to know, maybe they still have good relations. It seems like I always see them at the events, like talking to each other. And also, by the way, he is Russian. He's not actually Ukrainian. So that's another factor. He could go to this team that all, I mean, everyone speaks Russian in these teams anyway, by the way. Ukrainian people speak Russian. But it would be with his original countryman. So I would have thought that would be a potential thing on the table. Because for me, the problem right now is you've got Na'Vi, who are really good, but they're stuck at this level of sort of like 4th or 5th best team in the world. Then you have HellRaisers, who's stuck at the level of like 8th or 9th when they're on the good day. Then you have that team, who's like, what, like 13th, 14th. And you have all three of these teams, but if you took all the pieces and just mixed them up, and then I got to choose the parts to go out, you could make two teams that would be like, well, one could be the best team in the world, could be like top 2 or 3 consistently, and you could have another team that could be like 5th to 8th consistently. So you could have a better 2 teams out of the 3 sets. So overall, there are my overall thoughts on the CIS shuffle, as it's called. I think the big issue here is there are positives for each of these teams, but there's also some clear negatives that have yet to be resolved. And I don't think anyone can really say they were the winner so far in this, because each had to give up something. And even when they gained something, it came with its own negative as well as the upside. So it was an interesting set of moves, certainly, but I'm not like super confident yet that either team will be really good.